What is up, you guys? Welcome back to another video. So today is my March wrap-up slash spring TBR. So I read 5 books in March, the ones behind me, and I feel like I had a pretty good reading month. I'm definitely prioritizing quality over quantity. I think I've mentioned that before. I kind of started that last year in 2022, and I'm continuing it into 2023 for sure. And then at the end of the video, the second half is going to be a spring TBR. Happy spring, happy April. I'm pretty pumped. I've got a couple of books that I've kind of been not really putting off, just I haven't prioritized them. And so I'm really excited for a few things. Some of them I've already received in the mail, the ones that I want to read in like April, May. So yeah, I'm pretty pumped about it. So the first one that I read was a translated novel. It was translated from the Italian, and it's The Lying Life of Adults by Elena Ferrante. I think that's how you say her last name. I was hoping that this was going to be kind of a Call Me By Your Name. I was hoping for those vibes because it's set in Naples. It's basically a coming-of-age novel. We're following a young woman. She's 14. Her name is Giovanna. The event that kind of sets the whole book in motion is she overhears her father mention how, you know, she's going through puberty, and she's like, I don't remember if he directly says that she's ugly, but he makes a reference to Giovanna's aunt, Aunt Vittoria. Giovanna doesn't know what this aunt looks like, and so she goes like searching for a picture of her. She can't find one, and so she has to find her in the yellow pages and like track her down and go visit her. So everything that follows is what we expect from a coming-of-age novel. Giovanna's having all sorts of firsts, new experiences, that sort of thing, and it's kind of spurred on by the way that her aunt lives. Her aunt doesn't really wear makeup, she's a smoker, she doesn't have like the traditional, the same values that Giovanna's mother and father does. And so it kind of, meeting her aunt kind of opens her world a little bit. I gave it like a 3.5, maybe a generous 4 stars, just because even though like over-analyzing and like being overcritical and kind of overthinking everything, I feel like is something that you do when you're young, there was just so much of that in here that I just couldn't get super into it. I felt like there was not a whole lot happening, and it's mostly just Giovanna kind of over-analyzing and picking apart the way that her friends are reacting to her and her perception of herself through other people's eyes. Again, that's super relatable. I was hoping for a little bit more plot heavy. I think I've realized over the years I'm just someone who I need a good plot, and so this was definitely character driven. We're just so focused on Giovanna and her little world and the new boys that she's meeting and having crushes on. Meeting Aunt Vittoria is really the catalyst for a lot of things that happen to Giovanna in this short amount of time. You also have it kind of paired with the narrative of her like finding herself or discovering herself, trying to figure out who she is. I feel like that's like the entire process of growing up is just like you trying to figure out like who you are and like what kind of niche you fit into. I feel like that's why there's been like a rise in aesthetics for like Gen Z. Everybody's trying to figure out, like when you're young, that's what you're trying to do, is just like figure out who you are. Ultimately there was relationships, but I think there was a lot more lust than love in here, and so that's kind of where it was lacking for me. I couldn't really connect. I could connect with her, but I couldn't really connect with any of the other people. Next up is In the Distance by Hernan Diaz. This one comes highly recommended by Sunbeam's Jess here on YouTube. Any book that she gives like at least a 4-star rating to, I usually put on my TBR like pretty instantly. It was a finalist for a Pulitzer, and I feel like that is maybe why there's no blurb, there's not a synopsis. I stumbled across this in Dallas when I was in Terabang Books. Boyfriend and I went recently for spring break, and there was a couple of local bookshops that I ducked into while I was there. And saw this one and immediately knew that I needed to get it. It is very obvious why it was a finalist for a Pulitzer. I'm kind of surprised it didn't win. We were following Håkan, who is I think I'm saying his name right. He's Swedish, he's a Swedish immigrant. He and his brother get separated, and that is kind of what sets off the plot. Boat that he does get on routes him completely all the way on the other side of America, and so he knows that he's gonna have to just like make the trek basically across America to get back to New York to hopefully be able to find his brother. This was incredibly transportive. I felt like I was there. Diaz does such a good job of describing the landscape and what's going on, like the terrain. He does in about 250 pages what I feel like a lot of authors and writers can't do in twice that amount. Like, I've read books almost 1,000 pages long expecting to get this sweeping saga, and so much of it could have been pared back and been more powerful, and I feel like that's what Diaz does really well. I put in my notes that Hawken is like a sweet Shrek, because he's absolutely enormous. He's giant. His toes keep popping out of his moccasins. Just kind of a humble, just like a big teddy bear, and he's just like taking it day by day and trekking across America. We're taken on what essentially is a decades-long journey, and it becomes the story of his life. I kept imagining it like this epic Scorsese-directed film. I could absolutely see this being adapted one day. It reminded me a little bit of like The Revenant or something like that, where you've got the sort of survival situation. I love that the ending kind of felt like a beginning, so it was fantastic. Next up was a psychology book. Now, typically when I'm reading nonfiction, it's usually like a body, mind, spirit kind of book, but I have seen this book, and I know you have too. A lot of books like this, I feel like they use a lot of jargon, and they're not super relatable. They tend to be kind of dry, and this one, James Clear really focuses on how to implement it. I started this one on audiobook. I was listening to the audiobook, but there are so many little infographics and things that I thought, you know what, I kind of want a physical copy so that I can look at those things. He really does lay out a good blueprint of exactly what to do, the process that you should do, the order that you can do them in, and then if one thing doesn't really work, he kind of gives an alternative. I think the thing that makes this the most practical, and the reason why it's become so popular, is because he lays out exactly what you need to do in order to make a change, and he calls it habit stacking. So habit stacking, and I've actually implemented this in my life. So you basically sandwich a new habit in between two habits that you already do automatically. For example, I get home. What I used to do is I would just come home and then immediately shower. That would be like my separating like work from home. That would be like the thing that kind of triggered my brain into like, okay, I'm in relaxation mode now. I would immediately change into my pajamas. Like, I'm literally in my pajamas by like 5:30. I have basically a desk job. I sit all day long. And so what I knew that I needed to do was get on the treadmill. I have a treadmill. You guys have probably seen it in my vlogs. I read on there. I stacked it between getting home, and instead of immediately going to the shower, I walk for at least a mile and then I shower. So I sandwiched that new habit in between something that I would just do automatically coming home without even thinking about it. I would just head straight for the bathroom. And that's really helped me feel less kind of restless at night because I'm getting in those steps, and now it's just my habit. So it's all about those little changes, and I like that he really does break it down and make it very, very reasonable and very doable. You know, if you make it quick, you have to make it easy, otherwise you're never gonna stick with it. So that was a 5 stars for sure. I loved that one. Alright, next up was a reread, and I have said before on my channel I'm not a big rereader, and I feel like this is maybe why. So I read Brave New World again by Aldous Huxley. Boyfriend and I started reading it together, and we got about 4 chapters in, and we quit reading it together because, and I told him, I was like, it's not as good as I remember. First of all, I recommend it. It's a classic. There are a lot of parallels to our world. And I do think he was ahead of his time and making really good commentary. I finished it on audiobook. I kind of sped through the audiobook on 1.5 speed. And I am glad that I finished it. It does pick up. I forgot that it gets a little bit better as you keep reading. If you can get through those first 3 or 4 chapters where it's just numbers being thrown at you, like how long the conveyor belts are with the decanting bottles and how many embryos are being processed every hour, if you can get through all just like the senseless numbering kind of passages, then you're good once you get a couple of more chapters into it. It is set in some sort of distant utopic future in which citizens of the world state live essentially emotion-free because of a drug called soma. There's no war, there's no crime, because nobody's really feeling anything very deeply. The other really unique thing about Brave New World is the very rigid caste system that exists. So you have epsilons, betas, and alphas. Everybody is born, it's predetermined like where you're going to be, so everybody's born into a particular caste. And this caste system is reaffirmed by the mantras they hear at night in their sleep over and over again for like years, all throughout their childhood and adolescence. They hear different things and then those become their beliefs. So they're essentially brainwashed from birth. This system has created basically a society of robots, and they don't question anything, and they have basically no critical thinking skills. Sounds familiar. It does get much more interesting once you get into Lenina and Bernard's relationship. Lenina is basically a sheep, just like all the other citizens. Bernard is like a black sheep though, so he's starting to question things. He doesn't just take soma, he doesn't just take a pill when he starts to feel a little bit uncomfortable. He would have been the first one to like question wearing a mask like in 2020. Like he's that person. But I do think there's a lot of value here because there are so many parallels to modern society. You look at something like TikTok or just social media in general, we go to our phones without even thinking about it, just like characters in the book turn to soma. So if you can make it past those first 70 pages, I do think it's worth the read. And the last book I have for you is The Animals in That Country by Laura Jean McKay. You say hi? So this I first originally saw at Interrobang Books. There was a different cover, I'll put it up on the screen, and I liked it, but I hadn't heard anything about it. It looked really kind of intriguing, and then I went home and kind of thought more about it, and I was like, yeah, I probably should have bought it. So I'm actually glad I waited because I like this cover a lot more with like the holographic letters, and this cover art is really cool. I love when books do like old artwork. It is a literary fiction novel about a zoo flu that takes over. If you come down with this virus, you can now hear animals talking. You can now understand the language of animals, which that concept I love. We all want to know, you know, what our cats and dogs are thinking, and the main character works at a zoo. So we've got a character in the best possible scenario. Our narrator is Jean. She's got some issues, some substance abuse issues. She's kind of right on the border of being an alcoholic. The only thing she really has to live for is her granddaughter, Kimberly. She's not really successful anywhere else in life. She's been trying to get a certification to be able to be like an actual keeper and interact with the animals. Right now she's just the tour guide on the zoo train, but she ends up leaving the zoo that takes place in Australia. She has to go through part of the outback to get Kim back. Because Lee shows up and he takes off with her. So she takes the ex-wife's camper van and just, you know, tries to go after them. How she's able to do that is because her favorite animal in the zoo is a dingo named Sue. And Sue obviously has a very good nose on her, and she's able to smell Kimberly, and she thinks that she's going south. I will say the language of the animals doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It's kind of just like piecey little bits, almost like really bad contemporary poetry. If you've ever read like really choppy modern poetry, and you're like, I kind of know what you're saying, but you're not really being like very clear. I feel like there's a little bit open to interpretation. Jean seems to be able to understand them perfectly fine. She's kind of able to interpret what Sue the dingo is saying most of the time. It's more so Jean battling her inner demons and trying to kind of shut out what is now a very loud world, because she can hear everything. She can hear the birds, like the crows talking about how they want to eat her eyeballs. She can hear like little gnats, like any little bugs or flies, she can hear what they're saying. And so it becomes her trying to keep her cool and stay sane with all of that swarming around in her head. I ended up giving this one a 3.5 stars. It kept my interest, you know, I finished it. There's not a lot of quotable passages. I didn't really think the writing was anything exceptional. It just feels like a lot of getting there. Like it's a lot of just the drive searching for Kimberly, and it does get a little bit like culty at the end. I kind of liked that part. Just felt like the story could have been, I don't know, there was just something missing. There could have been a little bit more. Next is the spring TBR, so I'm very excited for some of these books. I think quite a few of these are short story collections. The first one is People from My Neighborhood. This one I originally saw in like a local bookshop in downtown. and I should have picked it up, but I didn't. It's got like micro fiction in it. It's not even like short stories. I think they're like micro stories, and I want to say it's translated from maybe the Japanese. I could be wrong, but it sounds really interesting. I'll put the synopsis on the screen for you. Then the next short story collection I want to read is Milk Blood Heat. This one, I want to say I first saw Sunbeam's Jess talk about it, and then more recently Noelle Gallagher here on YouTube also read it and gave it a really good review. So this one is set, I believe, in the suburbs of Florida, and I've been to Florida a couple of times, and boyfriend and I are thinking about maybe going again this summer, so that's kind of fun. It depicts the sultry lives of Floridians and intergenerational tales that contemplate human connection, race, womanhood, inheritance, and the elemental darkness in us all. Sounds really good. I love a good short story collection because you're not really committed. If you don't like one, you just kind of move on to the next one. Then we have Get in Trouble. This is another short story collection. This was one that Pinterest recommended to me, and sometimes the algorithm on Pinterest, I mean, we all know the algorithm's kind of scary sometimes. I'm not going off of anybody's recommendation, just Pinterest, but it looks really interesting. So I believe this one has 9 short stories in it. It's got fantasy, magical realism, a little bit of light horror, and this one was a finalist for a Pulitzer as well. I keep seeing books that are finalists for the Pulitzer. So I don't know if that's like a theme that's happening or if it's just like the algorithm recommending things to me, but it's got to be good. The last couple of books that I've read that were a finalist for a Pulitzer, I was not disappointed by. It's also categorized as a speculative fiction, which sometimes you get a really eclectic mix because of all the different things you can do with it, because it'll be like horror, but then it's also like science fiction, and then there's also a little bit of magic. It's just kind of like the best of everything. It's like a mishmash of everything, so excited for that one. This next one I do have a physical copy of. I found an old library copy on eBay for pretty cheap. So I originally saw this in, again, a local bookstore here downtown, but it was like summer, and I remember thinking, okay, I need to wait until spring to read that one because it's the way spring arrives. From a visionary team of female and non-binary creators, it's a collection of Chinese science fiction and fantasy, all translated obviously into English. The cover's gorgeous. I remember picking it up and it just looks so interesting. I just told myself that I would wait and read it in actual springtime, and it is now spring, so I can do that. The little blurb says, "In the way spring arrives in other stories, you can dine at a restaurant at the end of the universe, cultivate to immortality in the high mountains, watch roses perform Shakespeare, or arrive at the island of the gods on the backs of giant fish to ensure that the world can bloom." So it says these stories have never been published in English before, and they represent both the richly complicated past and the vivid future of Chinese science fiction and fantasy. I may be most excited for this one because those descriptions at the beginning and the blurb are really, really intriguing. The next one I thought was a poetry collection. It is not. I just reread the back and it's essays. It's a collection of essays by Mary Oliver, Upstream. I feel like, again, this is one like I've seen all over the internet, and I kind of feel like I'm missing out. Plus it's super short, so it probably won't take me that long to get through. It's a collection of essays in which revered poet Mary Oliver reflects on her willingness to lose herself within the beauty and mysteries of the natural world and the world of literature, emphasizing the significance of her childhood friend, Walt Whitman, who inspired her to vanish into the world of her own writing. Oliver meditates on the forces that allowed her to create a life for herself out of work and love. Throughout this collection, Oliver positions not just herself upstream, but us as well, as she encourages us all to keep moving, to lose ourselves in the awe of the unknown, and give power and time to the creative and whimsical urges that live within us. So this would be a perfect one to read at the park. If you guys have seen any of my reading vlogs, that's something that we do when the weather's decent, so this would be like the perfect one to take while I'm reading under the trees. So can't wait for that one. And then the last one that I have to mention is pretty heavy. It's In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. I think I'm saying her name right. I can't remember. She was on somebody's podcast. She's an escapee from North Korea. There are not that many people who've defected from North Korea. So I think she has 2 books. One of them is her memoir, the one that I want to read. It's been a minute since I've read one where it's like somebody's really going through like a traumatic experience. The last couple of memoirs I've read have been more fun and lighthearted. It sounds like it's going to be a really harrowing story. So I'm very curious about the ins and outs of it. I hope she goes into detail. I'm very curious. Yeah, that one's definitely a little bit heavier, but I think it'll be a very important read. So that is everything. Thank you guys for watching if you made it all the way to the end, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys.
What?
Nothing. Say hi. Say hi real quick. Say hi. Okay, bye.